The Grand Galactic Museum of Xenoarchaeology on Centauri Prime was having what the humans would call a particularly bad day. Though, to be fair, Curator Zixatal was having more of a particularly bad century. The floating orb that served as their head pulsed an agitated shade of purple as they watched yet another failed attempt to activate the ancient sword. "And there goes another one," Zixatal muttered to nobody in particular, their translation matrix converting the thought waves into standard galactic common. The latest volunteer, a proud warrior of the silicon-based Kraxan species, lay sprawled on the ground, all 6 of their crystalline arms smoking slightly. "Someone get them to the medical bay, please. And do remember to file the standard injury waiver." The gathered crowd of various species shuffled nervously, their appendages, tentacles, and other assorted limbs twitching, with a mixture of anticipation and dread. They had all come to witness the latest attempt to activate what had become known as the Sword of Seven Suns, a rather grandiose name for what appeared to be, at first glance, a rather unimpressive weapon. The sword hung suspended in a containment field, its metallic surface gleaming with an inner light that seemed to shift and change depending on who was looking at it. The blade itself was approximately 1.2 meters in length, forged from an unknown alloy that had stubbornly resisted all attempts at analysis. The hilt was adorned with strange symbols that had driven xenoarchaeologists to the brink of madness for the past 3 centuries. "That's the 47th attempt this cycle," Assistant Curator Plex announced, their gelatinous form rippling with statistical readouts. "We've now had representatives from 23 distinct species try to wield it. Results remain consistent: immediate neural feedback, varying degrees of plasma burns, and in one particularly memorable case, spontaneous crystallization of all bodily fluids." Zixatal bobbed in acknowledgement, their orb head cycling through shades of blue as they reviewed the data. The sword had been discovered in the ruins of what they called the predecessor civilization, a species so ancient that even their name had been lost to time. Every attempt to decipher the engravings on the blade had failed spectacularly, though not for lack of trying. "The engravings seem to be mocking us," Professor Ilndar, the team's leading xenoarchaeologist, chittered through their mandibles. Their compound eyes reflected the sword's glow as they studied it for the 1000th time. "They rearrange themselves when we're not looking. Yesterday, I swear they formed what appeared to be a primitive joke structure, though that might have been the sleep deprivation talking." A quiet murmur of amusement rippled through the gathered crowd. It was well known that Professor Ilndar had not slept in what humans would consider 3 weeks, sustained only by a combination of stimulants and pure, unbridled academic fury. "Perhaps," Zixatal suggested dryly, "we should consider the possibility that the sword is simply broken." They immediately regretted the words as the sword's glow intensified momentarily, as if offended by the very suggestion. "Or not," they added hastily, their orb flickering briefly to a cowardly shade of yellow. The museum's grand entrance chime sounded with an unnecessarily dramatic flourish, causing Curator Zixatal's orb head to pulse with annoyance. The timing couldn't have been worse. They were still trying to scrape the remains of crystallized bodily fluids off the display floor. "The human delegation has arrived," Assistant Curator Plex announced, their gelatinous form vibrating with what might have been excitement or indigestion. "First contact protocols are in effect." "Wonderful," Zixatal muttered, because what this day really needed was a bunch of barely spacefaring primates wandering around priceless artifacts. The humans entered with all the grace of a Thoraxian bull in a quantum crystal shop. They were led by various diplomatic officials, but what caught everyone's attention was the tall figure trailing behind them, nose buried in an actual physical notebook, a sight that made several of the more technologically inclined species shudder in horror. Dr. Alexander Chen, as the humans' credentials identified him, was apparently their leading xenohistorian. He wore what appeared to be a thoroughly worn jacket, with actual patches on the elbows, a fashion choice that made Professor Ilndar's mandibles click in distress. "Is that deprocessed plant fiber they're writing on?" one of the gathered aliens whispered in horror. "With manual pigment application tools?" "Barbarians," another agreed solemnly. The human looked up from his notebook, pushing his glasses up his nose with a gesture that seemed entirely too practiced. His eyes immediately locked onto the sword, and a grin spread across his face that made several nearby species instinctively activate their defensive mechanisms. Fascinating, Dr. Chen breathed, already striding toward the display. The engravings appear to be a variant of early Proto-Indo-European, but that's impossible, unless... He trailed off, muttering to himself and scribbling frantically. Yes, very impressive, Zixtal interrupted, their orb cycling through shades of patronizing mauve. But perhaps we should focus on the diplomatic proceedings rather than letting your primitive species drool over artifacts you couldn't possibly understand. The gathered aliens tittered in agreement, though they quickly fell silent as Dr. Chen pulled out something that looked suspiciously like a magnifying glass. Several of them backed away slowly, as if afraid the primitive technology might be contagious. The Sword of Seven Suns, Dr. Chen read aloud, completely ignoring the condescension floating quite literally over his head. Though that's not quite right, is it? The inscription actually reads... He squinted at the blade, adjusting his glasses. Well, that's rather rude of it. Professor Ilndar's compound eyes widened. You can read the engravings? Oh, certainly, Dr. Chen replied absently, still making notes. Though I think someone's been playing a rather elaborate practical joke. These symbols keep rearranging themselves to form what appear to be ancient memes. The sword, Professor Ilndar began, mandibles clicking in what passed for their lecture mode, has been the subject of study for approximately 342 standard cycles. Its discovery led to no fewer than 6 interplanetary conflicts, 2 religious schisms, and 1 particularly nasty poetry competition. Dr. Chen continued scribbling in his notebook, occasionally glancing up at the sword, with an expression that made Curator Zixatal's orb head pulse with concern. The human seemed far too amused for someone learning about multiple wars. The Crystalline Confederation believed it to be the key to transcendental evolution. Assistant Curator Plex bubbled enthusiastically. They spent 40 cycles trying to activate it before their high resonator accidentally turned himself into a rather attractive wind chime. Which we now keep in the gift shop, Zixatal added dryly. It's our best-selling item. The gaseous collective was convinced it was a communication device, Professor Ilndar continued, compound eyes glazing slightly as they recalled the incident. They attempted to interface with it through direct molecular interaction. The resulting explosion created what we now call the Rainbow Nebula in Sector 7. Pretty, Dr. Chen commented, sketching something that looked suspiciously like a doodle of the sword-wearing sunglasses. The hive mind of Proxima attempted a mass psychic interface, Plex contributed, their gelatinous form rippling with remembered excitement. The feedback loop caused them to accidentally achieve enlightenment and transcend this plane of existence. We still get postcards occasionally. Zixatal's orb flickered with irritation, which would be more impressive if they didn't all just say, "Wish you weren't here." Our scientific studies have been equally illuminating, Professor Ilndar continued, choosing to ignore the postcard discussion. The sword exhibits quantum properties that shouldn't be possible in our universe. It simultaneously exists and doesn't exist, emits radiation that our instruments can detect but not measure, and occasionally hums what seems to be ancient advertising jingles. The energy readings are particularly fascinating, Plex interjected, displaying a holographic graph that looked like a drunk quantum physicist's nightmare. They spike randomly, following no discernible pattern except they pause dramatically. They seem to increase whenever someone tells a bad joke in its vicinity. A sword with a sense of humor, Dr. Chen muttered, still writing. Now that's something you don't see every day. The most peculiar readings occurred during the Great Convergence, Professor Ilndar added, their mandibles clicking faster with academic excitement. All 7 nearby suns aligned perfectly, and for a brief moment the sword... Yes, Dr. Chen prompted, looking up from his notebook. It displayed what appeared to be a loading screen and the message "Update pending," Zixtal finished, their orb turning an embarrassed shade of purple. We spent the next decade trying to find the download button. Our leading theory, Professor Ilndar concluded, trying to maintain their dignity, is that the sword is either a weapon of unimaginable power, a practical joke by an advanced civilization with too much time on their appendages, or both. And the engravings, Dr. Chen asked, pushing his glasses up again. Has anyone managed to translate them consistently? The gathered aliens exchanged uncomfortable looks. They refused to be translated, Plex admitted. Every time we think we've cracked the code, they rearrange themselves into what our linguistics experts assure us are elaborate puns in at least 17 different dead languages. Though last week, Zixatal added, they just spelled out LOL for 3 straight days. The museum's security protocols for sword-touching attempts had evolved considerably over the centuries, mostly through trial, error, and an impressive amount of property damage. The current procedure involved 3 layers of energy shields, 2 temporal stabilization fields, and what appeared to be a very large caution wet floor sign. "Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed?" Curator Zixatal asked Dr. Chen, their orb head cycling through concerned shades of blue. The standard waiver for attempting to touch the sword is 17,000 pages long. We had to add an entire section about spontaneous transmutation after the fungoid collective's attempt. "What happened to them?" Dr. Chen asked, removing his jacket and rolling up his sleeves like a man preparing to arm wrestle destiny. "They're now a rather successful chain of interstellar coffee shops," Assistant Curator Plex supplied helpfully. "The transformation was technically an improvement, though their espresso is somewhat sentient." Various species had gathered around the containment field, maintaining what they considered a safe distance, which, in the case of the paranoid collective of Betelgeuse, meant watching via telescope from orbit. Professor Ilndar was frantically calibrating measurement devices, their mandibles clicking at speeds that threatened to achieve resonance. The last being who attempted this was reduced to their component atoms, a concerned crystalline elder warned, their faceted surface reflecting the sword's pulsing light, though they did reform eventually with a much better sense of fashion. "And the one before that was sent backward in time," another alien added. "They're due to arrive next Tuesday, assuming causality holds up its end of the bargain." Dr. Chen nodded absently, still studying the sword's engravings. "Has anyone tried just asking it nicely?" The gathered crowd fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of Professor Ilnadar dropping an extremely expensive quantum analyzer. "Ask the sword," Zixatal repeated, their orb flickering with disbelief. "The ancient artifact of immeasurable power that has defeated our greatest minds and strongest warriors. You want to ask it nicely?" "Well, yes," Dr. Chen replied, adjusting his glasses. "The engravings clearly indicate it's not just a sword. It's more of a cosmic USB stick with an attitude problem." The security fields hummed as they were powered down one by one. The sword hung suspended in its containment field, its surface seeming to ripple with what might have been anticipation or indigestion. It was rather hard to tell with ancient artifacts of power. Dr. Chen approached slowly, his notebook tucked safely in his back pocket. The sword's glow intensified slightly, and several of the gathered aliens activated their emergency teleporters. "Hello there," Dr. Chen said pleasantly to the sword, as if he were greeting a slightly eccentric aunt at a family gathering. "I couldn't help but notice you've been playing practical jokes on everyone for the past few centuries. That's quite the commitment to comedy." The sword's glow pulsed in what seemed suspiciously like a chuckle. "The puns in the engravings were particularly clever," he continued, now standing directly before the containment field. "Especially that one about the quantum physicist walking into a bar. Though the probability jokes were a bit derivative, the sword's surface rippled and the engravings rearranged themselves into what appeared to be the ancient equivalent of an eye roll. "Would you mind terribly if I tried to pick you up? I promise not to make any cutting remarks." There was a collective groan from the assembled aliens at the terrible pun, but the sword's glow brightened considerably. The engraving shifted again, forming what was unmistakably a smiley face. "I believe," Dr. Chen said, reaching for the containment field controls, "this is what we historians call a moment of truth. Though personally, I'd settle for a moment of not being disintegrated." The field dropped. The assembled crowd held their breath or equivalent respiratory functions. Professor Ilnadar's recording devices whirred frantically. Curator Zixatal's orb head turned a shade of anxiety previously unknown to chromatic science. Dr. Chen reached out and wrapped his fingers around the sword's hilt. The universe held its breath, and then the sword did something it had never done before in all its centuries of recorded history. It giggled. The sword lifted effortlessly from its containment field, its surface now glowing with a warm golden light that somehow managed to convey both ancient power and mild amusement. Dr. Chen held it up, squinting at the rapidly shifting engravings that now cascaded along the blade like a waterfall of ancient memes. "Oh," he said in the tone of someone who had just figured out the punchline to a 300-year-old joke. "Of course. It's not a sword at all, is it?" The assembled aliens watched in stunned silence as the weapon began to transform. The blade shimmered, its surface flowing like liquid metal, until it resembled something between a conductor's baton and a universal remote control with delusions of grandeur. "It's a key," Dr. Chen announced, then paused. "Well, more accurately, it's an ancient tech support device with a rather peculiar sense of humor." Curator Zixatal's orb head cycled through so many colors of disbelief that they briefly invented 3 new ones. "A what?" "You see," Dr. Chen explained, holding up the transformed artifact, "we humans have similar legends. The sword in the stone, Excalibur, dozens of stories about magical weapons that choose their wielders. But we also had legends about ancient help desk technicians who loved practical jokes." Professor Ilnadar's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Are you suggesting that the predecessors were essentially cosmic IT professionals?" "Yes," Dr. Chen grinned. "The engravings aren't just random puns. They're tech support tickets, really, really old tech support tickets." The device in his hand projected a holographic display that looked suspiciously like an ancient customer service chat interface. The text scrolled past in multiple languages, including what appeared to be emoji from at least 12 extinct civilizations. "Look here," he pointed to a particular section. "This part that everyone thought was a prophecy about 7 suns aligning, it's actually a complaint about system updates always happening at inconvenient times. And this bit about the chosen one who shall wield great power, that's just an administrator password reset request." The gathered aliens stared in mounting horror as centuries of religious and scientific theories crumbled in the face of something far more terrifying: technical support documentation. "But the wars," Assistant Curator Plex bubbled anxiously. "The religious schisms, the poetry competitions. All because nobody thought to submit a proper help desk ticket," Dr. Chen said, shaking his head. "The predecessors weren't godlike beings who vanished mysteriously. They were just really, really good IT professionals who got tired of dealing with interstellar service calls and took an extended lunch break." The device chirped happily, displaying what appeared to be an ancient out-of-office message that had been running for several million years. "The reason it responded to humans," Dr. Chen continued, now thoroughly enjoying himself, "is that we're apparently the only species whose help desk tickets match the proper format. All those myths about magical swords choosing worthy heroes, they were actually training manuals for customer service representatives." Professor Illendar had to be helped to a seated position, their compound eyes glazed with the 1,000-yard stare of someone whose entire field of study had just been redefined as ancient technical support. "But the power readings," Curator Zixatal protested weakly. "The quantum anomalies, the temporal distortions. Have you ever tried running ancient software on a modern system?" Dr. Chen asked, raising an eyebrow. "The compatibility issues alone can tear holes in reality. This thing was probably just trying to install drivers for the last few centuries." The device beeped in confirmation and displayed what was unmistakably a progress bar, along with the message, "Updates pending, 47,283,901. Estimated time remaining, or 5 minutes. "Our entire understanding of the predecessors," Professor Ilndar whispered, "based on help desk tickets and IT complaints." "The greatest civilization in known space," Dr. Chen agreed cheerfully, "and they left behind what amounts to a cosmic wiki page and a collection of universal tech support dad jokes. Though," he added, examining a new series of holograms, "they did also apparently have a really comprehensive coffee-making protocol." The device hummed thoughtfully and projected an image of what appeared to be an impossibly complex coffee machine schematic. Several of the fungoid collective's coffee shops across the galaxy suddenly upgraded themselves. "But why the sword form?" Assistant Curator Plex asked, still trying to process this paradigm shift. "Oh, that's the best part," Dr. Chen chuckled. "According to these logs, they just thought it looked cool. Apparently, even advanced civilizations can be a bit dramatic when it comes to product design." The gathered aliens watched in a mixture of awe and existential dread as Dr. Chen began scrolling through what appeared to be millions of years of accumulated spam emails, software updates, and intergalactic cat videos. Look on the bright side, he offered to the stunned crowd. At least now we know why the universe runs on what appears to be cosmic spaghetti code. The predecessors were just really big fans of adding features without updating the documentation. Not everyone was thrilled with the revelation that the greatest mystery in the galaxy had been solved by what amounted to reading the user manual. High Chancellor Vex of the Quantum Dominion arrived in a flash of unnecessarily dramatic lightning, their probability-defying form crackling with indignation. "This is preposterous," the Chancellor declared, their voice resonating across multiple quantum states simultaneously. "You expect us to believe that this primitive species, barely out of their gravity well, has mastered the artifact through technical support expertise?" Dr. Chen looked up from what appeared to be an ancient intergalactic message board discussion about proper cable management. "Well, that and a healthy appreciation for dad jokes, you'd be surprised how far that can get you in IT." The device in his hands cheerfully displayed a holographic rimshot effect. "I demand a test," Chancellor Vex thundered, causing several nearby quantum probability clouds to collapse in embarrassment. "Prove that you truly understand the power you now hold." Professor Ilndar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Chancellor, perhaps we should—" No, they have a point," Dr. Chen interrupted, adjusting his glasses with a glint in his eye that made several nearby species activate their emergency shields. "A test sounds reasonable. What did you have in mind?" The Chancellor's form shifted through several superpositions before settling on what they clearly thought was an intimidating stance. 3 challenges. If you fail, the artifact returns to containment, and humanity admits their technological inferiority. And if I succeed, then, the Chancellor paused dramatically, we will acknowledge your species' mastery of the predecessor's legacy. Counter-offer, Dr. Chen said, casually scrolling through what looked suspiciously like ancient cat videos. How about just one challenge? You try to log into the system. The gathered crowd gasped. Assistant Curator Plex actually bubbled so hard they temporarily achieved a higher state of matter. You dare mock the Quantum Dominion? Chancellor Vex bristled across several dimensions. Not at all, Dr. Chen replied pleasantly. I'm simply suggesting you do what every IT professional must, deal with someone who's forgotten their password. The device hummed approvingly and displayed a login screen that somehow managed to look both ancient and frustratingly modern at the same time. Chancellor Vex approached, their probability field writhing with confidence. Such primitive security will be no match for our quantum computational abilities. Oh, of course, Dr. Chen agreed. Just remember, passwords must contain at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, one special character, one emoji from a dead civilization, and a haiku about proper database management. The Chancellor's first attempt resulted in an error message that actually sighed in disappointment. Their second try caused the device to display a loading screen that was clearly taking longer than necessary out of spite. By the fifth attempt, the security questions had evolved to include, what was the name of your first pet quantum anomaly? And, in what galaxy did you first experience existential dread? Impossible, Chancellor Vex declared after their 12th failed attempt, their quantum field fraying around the edges. These security protocols defy all known laws of logic. Welcome to IT, Dr. Chen said sympathetically. Would you like to reset your password? You'll only need to answer these 300 security questions and solve this captcha that's written in interpretive dance notation. The device helpfully displayed a captcha so complex that 3 nearby mathematicians spontaneously developed new theories of computation just by glimpsing it. This is not a test of power, the Chancellor protested weakly. This is customer service, Dr. Chen suggested. Help desk support. The eternal struggle between users and security protocols? Yes, exactly. And that's why humans were chosen. We've been dealing with forgotten passwords, unnecessary updates, and cryptic error messages since we invented computers. We don't just understand this technology, we've lived it. The device chose that moment to display a blue screen of death so ancient it was practically a fossil, complete with a sad face emoji that somehow conveyed both sympathy and mild sarcasm. Chancellor Vex, representative of one of the most powerful civilizations in known space, master of quantum probability, quietly admitted defeat in the face of something far more terrifying than mere power, technical support bureaucracy. As the defeated Chancellor Vex retreated to a quantum probability cloud to sulk, Dr. Chen continued exploring the device's ancient database. His expression grew increasingly amused as he scrolled through millennia of accumulated data. "Oh, this is brilliant," he muttered, causing nearby aliens to edge away nervously. "Absolutely brilliant. Professor Ilndar, remember how you could never figure out why the predecessors vanished?" The professor's mandibles clicked anxiously. "Yes, it's only been the defining mystery of my entire academic career." "Well," Dr. Chen said, turning the device to display a new hologram, "they didn't vanish. They just went into early retirement, and I think I know where they went." The hologram showed what appeared to be an ancient employment contract, complete with pension plans and benefits packages that spanned multiple dimensions. You see, the predecessors weren't just the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They were its first IT department. They built the fundamental infrastructure of reality, debugged the laws of physics, and set up the universal operating system. But like any good tech support team, they also planned their exit strategy. Curator Zixatal's orb head pulsed with confusion. "But what does this have to do with humans?" "Everything," Dr. Chen grinned. "Look at their retirement plan. They needed somewhere quiet, out of the way, where they could relax without constant support tickets from evolving civilizations. So they chose a small, unremarkable planet on the spiral arm of an average galaxy. Earth, Assistant Curator Plex bubbled in realization. But that would mean humanity didn't evolve to understand the predecessors' technology, Dr. Chen confirmed. We inherited it. Every human myth about gods living among mortals, every legend about beings of power walking the earth, they were all just stories about retired IT professionals trying to enjoy their pension plans. The device helpfully displayed what appeared to be ancient vacation photos of cosmic beings learning to surf. But the scientific implications. Professor Ilndar's compound eyes were spinning with excitement. The quantum resonance patterns in human DNA, the unexplained technological leaps in your history. All those times humanity made bizarre technological breakthroughs because someone said, "Wouldn't it be cool if—" Dr. Chen nodded. Turns out we had some very bored, very retired tech support staff giving us hints. They couldn't resist helping with the occasional ticket, even in retirement. The political implications hit the assembled aliens like a quantum computing error. Representatives from various species began frantically communicating with their governments. "This is why humans adapt so quickly to new technology," Dr. Chen continued, now scrolling through what appeared to be an ancient social media feed full of technical support memes. "We're not just random primates who got lucky. We're the species that grew up next door to the universe's IT department. We inherited their debugging skills, their problem-solving abilities, and unfortunately, their sense of humor." The device punctuated this revelation with a series of ancient emoticons that somehow managed to convey both cosmic wisdom and dad jokes. But the geopolitical balance of power. Chancellor Vex had emerged from their probability cloud, looking somewhat frazzled. "This changes everything." "Does it, though?" Dr. Chen asked, raising an eyebrow. "Think about it. What's the one thing every advanced civilization needs more than weapons or resources?" The answer dawned on the assembled aliens like a software update they couldn't postpone any longer. "Technical support," Curator Zixatal whispered, their orb head turning a shade of enlightened realization. "Exactly," Dr. Chen smiled. "Humanity isn't interested in conquering the galaxy. We just want to set up a proper help desk, maybe standardize some protocols, establish a universal bug tracking system, create some actually helpful error messages." Several species simultaneously experienced what could only be described as technical support enlightenment. "Consider this," he continued, the device now displaying statistics about the galaxy's technological infrastructure. "How many of your civilizations have experienced inexplicable system crashes, mysterious quantum fluctuations, random temporal hiccups that your scientists call natural phenomena but suspiciously resemble software glitches?" The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, remembering countless technological mysteries that had been attributed to cosmic phenomena but did seem remarkably similar to computer problems. "Humanity's role isn't to rule the galaxy," Dr. Chen declared, the device humming in approval. "It's to help run its IT department. And trust me, Based on these diagnostic readings, the universe is in desperate need of some technical support. The device chose that moment to display what appeared to be the universe's equivalent of a Windows task manager, showing alarming numbers of unresponsive cosmic processes and an overwhelming amount of universal RAM usage. "Now," Dr. Chen said, pulling out his notebook and clicking his pen, with the air of an IT professional about to begin a very long shift, "who wants to submit the first ticket?" 6 months after what became known as the technical support incident, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Grand Galactic Museum of Xenoarchaeology had been converted into the Universal Help Desk headquarters, with Dr. Chen serving as Chief Technical Support Officer, a title that carried more weight than most military ranks in the new cosmic order. Curator Zixatal, now head of user experience, watched their orb head, reflecting off the newly installed troubleshooting terminals. "I still can't believe the Quantum Dominion agreed to the mandatory software update policy. Amazing what a few well-timed blue screens of death can do for diplomatic relations," Dr. Chen replied, reviewing a stack of support tickets from various civilizations. "Though I think the free coffee helped." The Fungoid Collective's sentient coffee shops had expanded into a galaxy-wide chain, serving as both beverage dispensaries and auxiliary help desk locations. It turned out that discussing technical problems over a cup of consciousness-expanding espresso made the whole process much more bearable. Professor Ilndar, who had transitioned seamlessly from xenoarchaeology to legacy system documentation, scuttled past with a stack of ancient manual printouts. The hive mind of Proxima sent another postcard. "They're considering coming back since we fixed the quantum lag in their sector." Humanity's new role as the galaxy's IT department had resulted in some unexpected benefits. Interstellar wars had decreased significantly, largely because it's difficult to maintain hostilities when you're all struggling with the same software updates. Several species had even started adopting human customs, particularly the sacred tradition of turning it off and on again. Another settlement request from the Silicon Consciousness Assistant Curator Plex bubbled, their gelatinous form now sporting what appeared to be a technical support headset. "They want to know if we can restore their civilization from a backup after that unfortunate attempt to defragment their collective memory." Dr. Chen nodded, making a note in his ever-present notebook. "Tell them we'll need their original product key and at least 3 forms of interdimensional identification." The device, now officially named Universal Support Ticket Interface Terminal, or USTIT for short, hummed contentedly from its new display stand, occasionally displaying helpful error messages that somehow managed to be both informative and slightly sarcastic. As Dr. Chen finished his shift and prepared to head home, the device suddenly pinged with an incoming message. The holographic display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a very old, very familiar email address. "From predecessors.it@universe.gov, subject performance review. Message, nice work on the system cleanup, kid. Keep this up and you might be ready for the real job soon. PS, did you really think we retired? That's cute. Someone has to run tech support for the other universes too. PPS, your internship starts next week. Don't forget to bring donuts." Dr. Chen stared at the message for a long moment, then slowly began to grin. He pulled out his notebook one last time and wrote a single line. "Note to self, ask about Multiverse Employee Benefits Package." The device winked at him with a flickering LED, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, a cosmic printer began spitting out his orientation paperwork.